Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here are your co-hosts, Doug Lesmerises and Shehan Jeyarajah. And we're back on the College Football Survivor Show. Interesting one, I think, today, Shehan. We're going to rank the 5 best coordinator combos in major college football. So you have your list of the top 5 combos. I have my list of the top 5 combos. It's weird. There are things you have to take into account. If you have a head coach who is a play caller on one side of the ball or very, very involved on that side of the ball, how do you evaluate the coordinator on that side of the ball? And I will tell you the reason that I think this is fun. There's a couple things that are happening. Alabama just hired a new offensive coordinator and a new defensive coordinator. We are going to talk about that, and that factors into this. Miami just fired its offensive coordinator and lost its defensive coordinator. We're going to factor that into this. There are things happening here, and there are some coordinator moves that feel seismic, and there are some coordinator moves that feel like not that big of a deal. And this is not the same thing as the best teams, because there is a specific example, Shehan, that I double-checked that to me is an indication of this a little bit. And it was, for instance, it's just a for instance. I have so many tabs. Can I count the tabs? I probably have 50 tabs open at the top of my computer screen right now. So I'm double checking it. Did I get it right? Yes, here it is. The 2019 Indiana Hoosiers, before the pandemic year when they were surprisingly very good, they were 8-5 in 2019. Tom Allen's 3rd season as the head coach. Shehan. The offensive coordinator that year was Kalen DeBoer, who's now the head coach at Washington. And the defensive coordinator that year was Kane Womack, who's now the head coach at South Alabama. And those were 2 darn good coordinators for an 8-win Indiana football team. So the best coordinator combo is not the same thing as the best team. And like that was the example that I came up with that sort of helped bring this all together in my mind.
No doubt. And which, by the way, if you're an Indiana football fan, the fact that you might need that to have like any success ever is probably not the most encouraging thing that's ever happened. But no, I mean, that's like a really, really great, like one of the better pairings of the last 5 years. And nobody would have paid attention to them in that kind of way. So I think that that's a great example. Look, there are obviously going to be teams that are nationally competitive that are going to be featured on this list. But I totally agree. I think that that combos were interesting because the other part of this too is that, you know, you really do, especially in sort of the middle classes of college football, have these teams that are so unbalanced. You know, you have a team that's just all offense and no defense, or all defense and no offense. So this actually ended up being a harder exercise than I anticipated it to be, because I don't think that there are as many programs as we think, even at the highest level, who maybe have pluses at both coordinator spots.
And the hard thing is, a lot of guys, we don't know how good they are. So I think what catches your eye in something like this, in a process like this, is a guy on the way up who's gotten some pub and his side of the ball has had some success, and maybe he's gone on some head coach interviews and you feel like this guy's going to be something. Or if you're maybe somebody who has been a head coach and being a head coach wasn't your thing, but the reason you got to be a head coach is because you were so good as a coordinator. And now maybe you're coming back down on the other side of your career and you're a former head coach who is iffy there, but as a coordinator, is like, there's no doubt this guy knows this side of the ball. When he's not in charge of the whole culture, when he's not dealing with boosters, where he's not motivating the whole team, and he's just digging in, scheming it up and coaching one side of the ball, you know he's good. So those kind of guys catch your eye sometimes. If you're in between, we just cited Kalen DeBoer and Kane Womack. If we were doing this exercise in the offseason before the 2019 season, we wouldn't have had them in the top 5. We didn't know how good they were going to be. So we also understand there's some perception. There's some realities about how your head coach fits into the mix and scheming it up. So we're not claiming this to be the be-all, end-all of defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator lists. But I do think it allows us to look at some pretty darn good college football teams in a different way, because I know the teams on my list are good teams, but it's not like my top 5 are the top 5 teams in the country.
No question. No question. And Honestly, I'm kind of just excited to get into it because I am curious to see what directions you go. Because to me, there was a clear number one, and I'm curious if you have the same one.
Okay, so let me start with my number one. And my number one is Phil Parker as the Iowa defensive coordinator, and if Iowa hired anybody that wasn't related to Kirk Ferentz as the offensive coordinator.
What if you hired Phil Parker as the point scorer and pointed out that they had the highest scoring defense in all of college football?
That's a great point, and that's really going to matter. If you had a scarecrow as Iowa's offensive coordinator, if you had Kirk Ferentz's neighbor, but they weren't blood relatives as the offensive coordinator, if you had...
I don't know. That I feel like he's definitely the kind of person who lives on a compound with his family, like full-on righteous gemstones, like 4 houses right next to each other. I think that's absolutely how Kirk Ferentz lives.
I was double checking some stuff. I think officially, like, UCLA does not have an offensive coordinator.
Oh, interesting.
Because Chip Kelly is there's nobody listed. If you had it blank, if when you went to the coaching staff of the Iowa Hawkeyes, there was a blank instead of Brian Ferentz there, I would have had Iowa in the top 5. So this is going to introduce us into something that I have to talk about because Iowa is embarrassing itself even more than it was embarrassing itself this year. And what has happened in the last day or two, Shehan, with the revelation that Iowa has set up parameters for Brian Ferentz as the offensive coordinator, that they must score 25 points per game this season and win a total of 7 games, or he's fired. This is now his contract. He got a $50,000 reduction in his salary from $900,000 to $850,000. That's also called in the coaching parlance, docking your allowance. He got his allowance docked, and Iowa, his contract will be terminated if they don't meet these thresholds. The only 2 that were reported were that they have to average 25 points per game and that they must win 7 games. I have gotten my hands on the document itself, underreported. He must take out the trash every Thursday. He has to keep his room clean. And no talking back, or the allowance will be docked even more. So this is in the contract that they are setting out the parameters of the way that Brian Ferentz can keep working for dad.
Okay, well, for the record, it's just the first 2. We actually have seen the contract, but the funny thing is, Iowa, because defensive points count towards this. They just have to average 25 points per game as a team. I believe that they scored more than 25 points twice last year. I think it was Nevada and it was Rutgers. I think those were the only 2 times they scored more than 25 points all season last year. But actually, I think it was my good friend Max Olson over from The Athletic who did the numbers. And if you take out defensive and special team scores, Iowa's offense alone only averaged 14 points per game. It is unbelievable what is happening over there. And by the way, when we say 25 points per game, that would be good enough for 85th nationally. That's still pretty bad. And this is like, hey man, if you do this, we'll pay you more than $1 million for the 2023 season. And I've never seen anything like this.
So this is an embarrassment, and we're going to talk for several more minutes about how this is an embarrassment. It is an embarrassment that Kirk Ferentz and athletic director Gary Barta are allowed to do this, that they have chosen to run their program this way. By the Football Outsiders metrics, Iowa's defense last year, just let me double check. Iowa's defense was number 1. It was the best defense in the country. The offense, Iowa, was 111th. That's in their F+ ratings. 1st and 111th. So we now set up a very interesting 2023 season because here's prediction number 1. If I were Phil Parker, one of the very best defensive coordinators in the country, who is continually dragged down by the ineptitude of the Iowa offense, you know what I wouldn't have my defensive players do this year? Score! No scooping scores, no interceptions. Knock the passes down. That's fine. And if you do pick something off, take a knee. Whoops. Hup, hup. We call that the Ferentz knee. Oh, what happened there? Oh, I could have run 65 yards for a pick 6, but I fell. So because why? What does Phil Parker want? I'm not trying to put words in Phil Parker's mouth. I'm trying to stand up for one of the best defensive coordinators in college football who's been saddled with this yahoo on the other side of the ball, whose daddy won't fire him. You want that guy gone. So do that. Iowa defenders, no scores this year. Number 2, the most interesting teams in college football suddenly become the defenses that are facing Iowa this year. Go opposing defenses. Let's go, boys. Rally the troops. Don't give up 25. I have the defensive rankings for the last year for the 12 teams on Iowa's schedule. Utah State, 118. You got to bring it. Come on, Utah State. That's not good enough.
Bounce back year. Come on.
Iowa State, 5th. Good. Okay. Matt Campbell and the boys keep that up. Western Michigan, 73rd. Penn State, 7th. Manny Diaz. How about a shutout? Manny Diaz? Michigan State, 79th. Mel Tucker, he's a defensive head coach. They can get that better. Purdue, 63rd. Ryan Walters. Hey, he's a defensive head coach who Purdue just hired. Let's bring it, Purdue. Wisconsin, 19th. That was with Jim Leonard. It's a new staff there, but Luke Fickell. Come on, guys. You're a defensive head coach. Let's do this. 19th. Minnesota, 9th. That's a good defense. Northwestern, 67th. They actually fired their bad coordinator and brought in the guy from North Dakota State. They should be better defensively. Rutgers, 49th. Greg Schiano, he's always got something for you. Illinois, 3rd. Bielema, what does Brett Bielema want to do more than get somebody fired? And then Nebraska, 75th. Matt Rule, again, motivated. But here's the question. Will opposing teams, as they are beating Iowa in this coming season, allow garbage time touchdowns for Iowa on purpose because it is in the best interests of everybody on Iowa's schedule for Brian Ferentz to remain employed as an unqualified, underachieving assistant coach? Why would they want to get rid of the guy? So it's like, man, Penn State really was taking it to Iowa. They were up 52-0. They gave up 21 points in the last 4 minutes. What happened? We know what happened. This is to keep Brian employed. Everybody in the Big Ten wants him around. So Phil Parker, no defensive scores for the Hawkeyes. Opposing teams, make sure you beat Iowa, but then maybe give up a couple scores at the end.
See, here's the thing. We need to flip this schedule because Nebraska, Illinois, Rutgers are the 3 teams that they're closing with. Those are going to be very competitive games that like all 3 of those teams really want to win. And so we need to flip it with Penn State, who I think will probably have a really good game against Iowa, so they can just allow a bunch of late scores, and Michigan State, who either is going to be good or going to be terrible, and either way, I think would be more than happy to allow them to score points. And those are 2 coaches who I think would just be like, yeah, screw it. Let's keep Brian Ferentz around. I think that that Illinois and Nebraska will be like, we got to win. We got to win this game. But I think that what is absolutely going to happen is Iowa's going to score like 56 points on Utah State and then average like 17 in every other game and hope that just carries them to the finish line. That seems inevitable.
So I'm making an announcement now. That Iowa-Nebraska game's on a Friday, always, right? It's on a Friday.
Yes.
So I can get back for Ohio State at Michigan on Saturday. If Brian Ferentz needs like 22 points or 28 points or something, we're going to have some to hit the mark against Nebraska. I'm going. And I might have up signs. I might dress up like a Cornhusker and put on overalls and hold up signs to cheer on the black shirts, because I don't have anything against Iowa football. I have something against blatant nepotism at the expense of an entire football fan base and team. So I am rooting. I officially would like to announce I am rooting against Brian Ferentz and the Iowa offense this year. I apologize in advance to Cade McNamara, the new quarterback who's transferring from Michigan and seems like a fine fella. And he like called out the doubters about Iowa's offense. I'm a doubter, Cade. I'm a doubter. I'm not doubting you. I'm doubting Brian Ferentz and his daddy. So this is an embarrassment. The other thing about this is why do we need Gary Barta? Because Gary Barta is actually supposed to be Brian Ferentz's boss, because that's the loophole around the nepotism stuff, because Iowa actually has a rule about this stuff. If you are cowardly enough that the only way you are willing to fire somebody is by a metric, why don't we let an algorithm be the athletic director at Iowa? I am the Iowa athletic director. The softball team did not average 4.6 runs per game, so the coach is fired. Like, we're just going to do math? That's how we evaluate. This is how we make personnel decisions, Gary Barta. We do it by an algorithm. The track and field team, the 1,600 meters was not fast enough. The coach is fired. That's how we do it. Way to be a boss. You're an embarrassment, Gary Barta. Come on the show. You're an embarrassment, Kirk Ferentz. You're an embarrassment, Brian Ferentz. You're unqualified for the job. You've never been good enough. And that Iowa is doing this to its fans. It's not about anybody else. It's about one group of people, the loyal, dedicated, diehard fans of Iowa football who have to put up with this ridiculousness from a cowardly athletic director and a head coach who runs a college football program like a family picnic. Nobody would hire this guy. Brian Ferentz he get hired by two people, his dad and his dad's best friend, Bill Belichick. He should be the towel boy for the Patriots this year. This is a joke. And they have taken a terrible situation and made it worse. And again, as an unbiased journalist who is here to cover college football and the joy it brings to people, I will be rooting my butt off for every defense that faces Iowa this year. Because it's better for everybody else in the Big Ten for Brian Ferentz to keep his job. It's not better for the Iowa fans. So I hope they score 24. Are they going to round up? That's the next controversy. That's 24.73 points per game.
It's 24.51.
Can you imagine they're losing to Nebraska 31-6 and they're at the goal line in the final 30 seconds trying to score so they can hit the 25-point threshold? When have we ever had a situation like this in sports? 25 points a game because you're too cowardly to make an actual decision. What a joke.
I pray that they're down by 17 points with less than a minute left against Nebraska, and they have to score. And in order to reach 25 points per game, they have to go for two. And it comes down to one play for them to average 25 points per game. And we're watching we're watching Brian Ferentz pull out his best play, which is like halfback dive or something, and it's just, oh man, it's going to be drama. The funny thing again about this is this would be good enough for 85th in the country if he averaged 25 points per game, but like Iowa doesn't even do that often. They don't even average 25 a game all that often, and part of it is pace. Like, you know, the one thing that I will say is that part of the reason that they are so bland and conservative on offense is also because like Kirk Ferentz is protecting the defense with pace. But like, come on. Did you not watch Joe Burrow light everybody on fire? Like, we are past this. We're past this. We're not doing this anymore. And also, by the way, this is a much longer term thought than this, but you know, the gravy train of being in the Big Ten West when nobody else can do much of anything is about to be over. That's about to be over whenever USC and UCLA come. And, you know, credit to Kirk Ferentz, who's one of the great coaches of the modern era, but geez, this isn't going to cut it anymore. And when you see also the way that other teams in the Big Ten West are adjusting to the challenge, most notably Luke Fickell bringing in who he brought in on the offensive side of the ball. Also, you look at who Purdue brought in on the offensive side of the ball. Also, you look at who Illinois has brought in on the offensive side of the ball and what they did last year. I mean, this is not going to cut it for very long. And I'm very curious to see how it gets handled.
This is the other thing that's so insulting about this whole idea, because you make a very good point. Teams have styles. And the idea that now Iowa is going to assign success to a point total, you can very much buy the idea that Kirk Ferentz says, listen, we are a defense-first team. We rely on special teams. The offense is the third most important part of our team. We have a way to win. And all that you're asking for competence within the structure of the team. Nobody should be asking for hard and fast stats, and they should throw those stats in our face and say, if you are judging Iowa's success by stats, that's not the point. We're a complementary football where the offense is charged with not putting the defense in a bad spot, being efficient, working the clock, and then being successful in the red zone. That's not what they're talking about. They are putting a number on this. That's the kind of thing that podcast people do, because they are such cowards, and they are abdicating their responsibility as stewards of this athletic department and of this program. They are passing it off to math. And what if they play a game in a snowstorm? What if they play another game in a hurricane? Like Ohio State played at Northwestern and the wind was so bad it shut everything down. What if they have a game where their top 3 quarterbacks conk their heads together on the sideline, are all out with concussion protocol, and they're like the 49ers were in that playoff game? They're practically running Wildcat, and they're just trying to make sure that they're trying to win 17-16. There are ways to be successful. There are ways to be a competent offensive coordinator that are not tied to hard and fast baseline stats. They didn't even do fancy stats. They did points per game. Because they know, you know why? Because they know maybe the punt guy's gonna. What if are you gonna tell the punt returner, hey, no fair catches this year? We want to try to steal 2 punt scores for Brian. No fair catches, right? Hey Phil, I know you kind of want to maybe play soft on 3rd and 13 here and let them punt it to us. But if they punt it to us, like there's no way we're gonna score. Can you blitz and maybe see if a guy can tip a pass and get an interception? Are you gonna play differently? Because this is why people are in charge, because stats don't tell the whole story, because adults who aren't blood related to their employees have a way of evaluating people in a full comprehensive way that goes beyond stats. So Gary Barta, here, you want to triple down? Let's triple down. Gary and Kirk, if you have such a great idea, all 3 jobs on the line, 25 points per game. You hit it, all 3 are safe. You miss it, all 3 are gone. Don't put it on Brian. Brian's bad. It's not Brian's fault he's bad. He tries hard.
Brian doesn't know any better. It's the old analogy from The Office where Pam goes, look, whenever a 12-year-old crashes a car into a tree, you don't say, this is the 12-year-old's fault. You look at the 40-year-old woman who put the 12-year-old in the front seat and said, hey, drive. And you know what? Gary Barta and Kirk Ferentz, you are the one who is putting the child in the front seat and telling him to drive when he's clearly not capable of doing it. By the way, the one reason that I think that they went with this 25 points per game thing is that Kirk's company line has been, when we score 24 points in a game, we are 55-3 over the past, I think, 8 seasons. They've lost a lot more than 3 games over the past 8 seasons. So, good luck. Certainly, look, the 2022 season was bad for a lot of reasons that were not just about their offensive coordinator being bad. Like their quarterback straight up had the yips. I don't know. There was a lot of things going on. They had injuries on the offensive line. But like you said, that's why you take a guy in context. And even getting to the point of saying, okay, here's a goal is ultimately cowardly, because it means that you're not actually evaluating what's going on the field. And one of the things, whenever you get into major college football, that kind of shocks you after a while is realizing that sometimes you go into these rooms and some of these people have just as dumb ideas as we do.
The ultimate, it's when you grow up as a person, is when you realize that you don't have to be smarter than everybody. It's that everybody else is just as dumb as you are. By the way, Brian Ferentz became the quarterback's coach last year. Yeah, so that did. Terrible quarterback play also on him.
Yes. They fell from like 70th to 123rd in passing offense. So congratulations, Brian.
If this podcast goes more than an hour and 5 minutes, you're fired. So I could evaluate you on your contributions to the podcast, on how smart and interesting you were, but instead, I'm just going to go by numbers because that feels easier. So, hey,
we better get a move on then.
An hour, 4 minutes, and 30 seconds. People are going to be hanging on. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Is Shehhan going to get fired? So Uncle Gary and Kirk are just going to sit on the porch and tell Brian, good luck, kid. Good luck, kid. You're 39.
We got to have a tracker every week that tracks exactly where Iowa is in points per game. And you know what's going to happen? Somebody's going to do that and bring it to the game every single week. They're going to have a sign with like a dial, like, where is he? Are they above 25? Are they below 25? We have to commit to that bit now.
I'm not so sure I would not. I think I would. I don't have to double negative this. I think I would commit to a 25-minute podcast every week during the season in which we analyze if they did get to 25 in the previous week, and do we think they will get to 25 the next week? An offshoot of the College Football Survivor Show. You know what it's called? The Brian Ferentz Survivor Show. Will he survive?
I mean, what's more Survivor than this?
And would that show be immensely more popular than this? Yes, it would be. I know everybody in Iowa would listen. By the way, 100% that is actually happening. The 25-minute, and if we go over 25 minutes, we're fired. The 25-minute Brian Ferentz Survivor Show, brought to you by your friends at the College Football Survivor Show. So look forward to that. And also, if you see Gary Barta or Kirk Ferentz, tell them that Doug says they're cowards and they're abdicating their job responsibility, and we should triple down on this. What's good for Bry is good for Daddy Kirk and Uncle Gary.
So I guess our maybe pie in the sky goal of getting all of the college football playoff chairmen on the show, probably not going to happen now.
No, I'd still do that. No, I mean, let's talk about playoff. Gary, what was it like that year when you had to go on ESPN and explain why Clemson should be second instead of fourth?
Gary, what were negotiations like when you were negotiating the exact point total that your offensive coordinator would have to score to keep his job? Like, was that something where he negotiated, or did you bring that to him? How does this work? Was he like, no, I only need to score 19 a game? I was like, no, 27. How does that work? I've never been part of a negotiation like that.
Was Howie Mandel there? Did they have supermodels with briefcases? And Brian was like, I'll take briefcase number 6. And he was hoping he would have 11 points per game in it. And they were like 25. And he was like, no, 25 is too many.
How did they decide that they were going to have a pay decrease, but still to an amount that's more than most group of 5 coaches? How did they decide on the number that he was going to be down $50,000 exactly? How did he decide that?
And how much was Brian's mom involved in this? Because it really is a family business, and mom has her say too. Business. So this is a joke. I don't want to call Iowa football a joke, because Iowa football is not a joke. Because you know what's not a joke? Jack Campbell's not a joke.
No,
right?
Not at all.
Like Lucas Van Ness isn't a joke. Like Riley Moss isn't a joke. Phil Parker's not a joke. Who was the receiver who left? He knew it was a joke, so he went to Purdue. Like these players aren't jokes. These players aren't jokes. These players are working their butts off. And they have an incompetent offensive coordinator who's employed because his dad puts family ahead of program. And I think neither of them should be employed. So we will monitor this. We will criticize them for this. We will root against them. I am rooting against Brian Ferentz. And I'm rooting against Kirk Ferentz. And I'm rooting against Gary Barta. Because they are allowing this to happen. Brian Ferentz isn't good enough to have this job. And they're all invited on. You can all come on the show. You know who I am, Kirk. You're invited. You're invited on the show. So come on. And also, we would love to have Brian on the offshoot, because that's always one of those things on Saturday Night Live, like Tina Fey does Sarah Palin, and Sarah Palin comes in, right? Does it? So to have Brian Ferentz on the Brian Ferentz Survivor Show would be great. So I can't wait. This is our career rocket ship. You know, these guys did this playoff show, it was fine. But the Brian Ferentz Survivor Show, 25 minutes of gold every week. Let's rank other offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators. We'll do it next after this. The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. All right, Shehan, I had to get that off my chest. I don't apologize. I'd say it again. We did go over 25 minutes. I was like 27, so I'm fired. So are Tommy Rees and Kevin Steele on your list? These are the new hires made by Nick Saban at Alabama, and it's so interesting because neither fits the profile. Now, listen, the reputation of Nick Saban of kind of bringing in the recycled coordinator, that really only is on the offensive side of the ball. And we talked about that on a previous podcast because he had Kirby Smart for so long. Pete Golding was there for a long time. But this is super interesting because Tommy Rees is not that. He is an up-and-coming college offensive coordinator that he poached from Notre Dame, where Tommy Rees played and then coached, and then you poached that guy. Well, you poach him with money. And now the defensive coordinator is Kevin Steele, who you got, I think, on our Name That Saban coordinator, because he was Nick Saban's first defensive coordinator for 1 year when Nick Saban started at Alabama. So it is a super back-around recycled defensive coordinator, but a guy who's always been in the college ranks. And then Tommy Rees as an up-and-coming offensive coordinator, it's opposite ends of the spectrum. It's exactly what we talked about, right? When you're looking for these coordinator combos, sometimes you look for a veteran guy who's been around, maybe on the backside a little bit, but a good veteran coach. And then you look for a guy on the rise. Bama got one of each. What do you think of the hires, first of all? And then we can figure out if they should be in our top 5 combo.
Yeah, well, full transparency, there are like two or three that I'm confidently putting on the list, and other than that, I have like 7 listed. I'm going to kind of go off of vibes because I really feel like after you get past the top group, it kind of is vibes. But for me, I do not lean towards putting them in my top 5. I like the hires that were made. I think that, Tommy Rees is interesting because he did a pretty good job under Brian Kelly. Last year was a little bit of a mess, but it was partially because they had quarterback injuries. They had to switch from Tyler Buckner to Drew Pine. Their offensive line took some time to come together. They didn't necessarily have the weapons that they wanted outside. This was very clearly a program in transition. But what impressed me the most was how much they improved week to week. I think that they started to find their identity. They started to understand their personnel a little bit better. The thing that's interesting about Tommy Rees is that he does not fit within a schematic framework, I guess you'd say. He's not somebody who's an air raid coach or a spread coach or a pro style coach. I think that you saw aspects of different types of games within his whole deal. And by the way, I mean, he has an interesting background because before he came to Notre Dame as quarterbacks coach in 2017, he spent 2 years as a grad assistant at Northwestern and then a year as an offensive assistant with the San Diego Chargers. So, well, at the time were the San Diego Chargers. And so, he kind of has this mixed background in some ways, and I think that comes out in a nice way. So I like the upside of this hire. I think that he's going to do probably a better job of raising the floor of this offense than I think Bill O'Brien did. I'm curious about what his fully realized version of an Alabama offense is. That's probably my biggest question about it. Defensively, look, I don't think that Nick Saban needed to reinvent the wheel. I think it's fine for him to hire a relative retread. Kevin Steele probably wouldn't have been my first choice, but it's not like he wasn't very successful during his time at Auburn, right? Which was 2016 to 2020. He's been in the SEC very recently. I think it is not an inspired hire. I don't think it needed to be an inspired hire. And by the way, the last guy that Nick Saban went with was a pretty inspired hire in former UTSA defensive coordinator Pete Golding, who obviously had his moments and then also had his flaws. So I think that defensively, he really wanted to limit the variance, and offensively, I think he wanted to increase the possibilities. And I think that he did that. But for me, I don't have them right now in my list of the top 5. I just think that Tommy Rees is still a little bit too much of an unknown in terms of what he's going to be on this team. And again, I view Kevin Steele as a fine hire, although somewhat uninspiring. And I will mention that obviously I heard many horror stories about Kevin Steele being a head coach because I went to Baylor University.
So I think it's well said for you on the defensive side of the ball that it's not inspired, but maybe it didn't need to be. So like safe, familiar, maybe isn't a bad way to go there. This Tommy Rees thing is interesting because, again, the constant churn on the offensive side of the ball, I think Tommy Rees stays until he's the head coach now. And unlike Steve Sarkisian, who left to be the head coach at Texas, but he had been a head coach twice before and was back in that recycle mode, I also don't know that 1 or 2 good years as the Alabama offensive coordinator is going to have Tommy Rees up for a major Power 5 job. And then now he's going to be in a spot of, well, I'm not going to jump for the Louisiana job. I'm not going to jump for, the Troy job, right? I'm going to wait I might be on the Kirby Smart plan here. I'm going to wait for a great job if you're successful. And now all of a sudden you're looking at a world where what if Tommy Rees is Nick Saban's offensive coordinator until Nick Saban retires? Like, I wonder, like, as Saban was trying, because I think you just could have found another guy whose shelf life was probably 2 or 3 years. And it's worked. Like, there's no problem with how Saban has done this. He's found a very effective way to do this. And this is a change. So maybe the right guy just wasn't out there. The perfect fit that way just wasn't out there. So I get that. But this really is a significant change, and like Tommy Rees becomes a very critical person sort of in the career of Nick Saban. Like, maybe he'll be a blip. Maybe it won't work out, and a year from now he'll be in Josh Gaddis land out the door. I doubt that. But, you
don't want to be in Josh Gaddis land.
No. Like, this is opposite side of the ball. Saban's a defensive guy. This is opposite. This is a really important hire. So I'll be curious how that works out. I went through everybody in the Power 5, everybody that I thought had a chance to matter. And then we went through and I made a list of 11 combos and picked my 5. I did have Rees and Steele for Alabama on that list of 11. I don't have them in my top 5. So I think it has a chance to work, though. I think it has a chance to work and maybe has a chance to work more cohesively than it has on the offensive side of the ball for a while. So this is a really important hire for Nick Saban, and I think he made a good choice. All right, let's go to number 1 on our list. I have Georgia.
Yes, 100%.
And this is Georgia with an asterisk because Todd Monken's interviewing. Todd Monken is out interviewing for NFL jobs. I think he talked with Tampa, and I think he talked with Baltimore. That's been reported. He's the highest paid coordinator in college football, over $2 million a year. Super impressed with what he dials up with that Georgia offense. I think he maximized everybody in that offense. He made Stetson Bennett look really good, knew exactly how to use him. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Dan Lanning left after last season to go be the head coach at Oregon this year. They get Will Muschamp in there. And this is, again, Monken and Muschamp are both veteran guys, and then Muschamp's the co-coordinator with Glenn Schumann. Schumann's kind of an on-the-way-up guy. Muschamp is a guy who, in the end, probably isn't a great head coach. But the reason everybody wanted him as a head coach is because he was such a good defensive coordinator. So then you land a guy like that, and I don't know what his aspirations are. He's still not a very old guy, but I also think maybe this is the right place for him. So as long as Todd Monken doesn't take a job, I think Kirby Smart has the best coordinator combo in college football.
No question about it. I like that they have sort of the old and new eyes on the defense too. Glenn Schumann is a really young guy. He's like 31, 32. He was somebody who was rumored to be a top target by Alabama. And I mean, he must have been happy where he is. And he's somebody who I think probably could have head coaching opportunities if he wanted them right now. But I think that he's smart to take his time and wait. And really, I mean, you get 3 guys obviously with this group as opposed to 2, but this is sort of an ideal coordinator pairing, right? Like this is how you want it to work. And yeah, Georgia to me is an obvious number 1. Not only are both guys pluses, I think that both guys are elite level coordinators as well. And there's a reason that this is the team that's won back-to-back national championships. I will ask you to go back to the Alabama thing for 1 second. I'm curious. So let's say that Todd Monken also, for these purposes, takes an NFL job. I was surprised that, Tommy Rees doesn't sound all that exciting, even though I think that it might work. It feels like there weren't many obvious superstar assistants out for jobs this year. Do you know what I mean? Like it felt like it was Garrett Riley was the one. Maybe we'll get to him later. Jim Knowles last year, right? We had that at defensive coordinator where he was like this superstar top of the market hire. I don't really know who those guys were on either side of the ball heading into this cycle.
I think it's interesting that Jim Leonard from Wisconsin is out there right now as a defensive coordinator.
He must be looking for NFL. He must be looking for NFL or taking a year off.
And he thought he was maybe going to be the head coach at Wisconsin. So I think that's interesting. I think Paul Chryst, the fired Wisconsin head coach as an offensive coordinator, possibly is interesting. This guy has a job, but I just wonder about him is Joe Brady, who's the quarterback's coach in Buffalo. He's not the offensive coordinator and is not the play caller there, but he was the offensive coordinator for the LSU Tigers in 2019. I think a lot of people thought he was on a rocket ship, and it turns out he wasn't, because he went to Carolina with Matt Rule and he got fired before Matt Rule even did. So like that guy's interesting to me. So in terms of that Bama got this taken care of while Monken's still at Georgia. And now if by the time you hear this podcast or a week from now, Todd Monken takes an NFL job, it feels like he wants an NFL job.
Yeah.
Just doesn't, because you interview doesn't mean that you're desperate to leave. But this guy's been at both places. And I think maybe like, how could you get better at Georgia? And he just went through the whole Stetson Bennett rigmarole, which worked out great, but was kind of a thing to manage. And I just saw somebody was making like their 10 predictions for the college football season. I think one of them was like Georgia plays 3 quarterbacks, but still wins the SEC or something. And I was like, oh my God, like what? Like that could absolutely happen, but what a mess. So this might be the exact right time for Todd Monken to leave. How's it going to get better? And if he leaves, I think it's the number 1 story remaining in the offseason of college football, because I think it is a somewhat fundamental shift for this mini dynasty and the best program in the country, because he's the coordinator on the opposite side of the head coach. And I think he's that good. And then when you start lining up the names, to your point, I don't maybe there's somebody obvious we're missing. Maybe there's somebody that Georgia would promote from within. Maybe we're missing the obvious guy. But it felt like Saban had a little bit of a tough time zeroing in on the offensive coordinator. And now Kirby Smart might have to do the same thing. I'd be fascinated to see where they wind up.
No doubt. No, it's going to be a weird situation. But for now, Georgia specifically does not have to worry about it. And they are number one.
Okay, I'll give you my number two then, since we have the same number one. Maybe we have the same number two. Michigan?
I struggled with where to put Michigan. I ultimately have them at 5. But it's not because I don't think they're good. It's just, it's really hard for me to determine what's just kind of their system, especially on defense. They kind of just like do I don't know what to credit to an individual coach. Do you know what I mean?
I agree. So this is Sharon Moore on the offensive side of the ball and Jesse Minter on the defensive side of the ball. It's complicated by the fact that Moore and Matt Weiss were co-offensive coordinators a year ago. Moore's offensive line, Weiss's quarterbacks, and Weiss got fired. And there are reports of something with the computer, and I don't know, and it's a really weird situation. He was not fired because of lack of football success. So the hard thing about this is the year before with Josh Gaddis and Mike McDonald, the first time Michigan made the playoff, they were great. And I thought their assistant coaches really mattered because at that point, they had made fundamental transitions. The big one was them firing Don Brown on the defensive side of the ball, who was had been with Jim Harbaugh from the jump at Michigan, and it wasn't cutting it anymore. They changed the coach. They changed the style. Mike McDonald came in and took over. Basically, John Harbaugh said, hey, take this guy. Jim did. Mike McDonald was awesome. He went back to Baltimore. And then John Harbaugh said, take this guy, because Jesse Minter had been in Baltimore, but had gone to Vanderbilt for a year. And so he kind of came in and just kept doing what Mike McDonald did. And they were just as good without Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo. So I am giving credit to Jesse Minter on the defensive side of the ball. And then offensively, I just thought Sharon Moore did a great job. And that it turned out that Josh Gaddis at Miami wasn't great. So it maybe leads you to the idea that it is a system at Michigan. However, that same system, Harbaugh was there and they'd never been this good. So Michigan got better when Harbaugh completely revamped the staff 2 years ago. And since then, they've made 2 straight playoffs after they revamped the staff and hired 7 new assistants. So I, all along the way, have given a lot of credit to Harbaugh for being willing to do that. And then I've given a lot of credit to that staff. I often don't give credit to the staff. I think it's a head coach and player business, and everybody else is a middle manager. Michigan changed the assistants, and bam, that was the turnaround. So I am comfortable ranking them this high because there's clearly a system in place, but they finally found the right people to execute it. And I do think Sharon Moore and Jesse Minter are good. So I'm comfortable having them at 2.
Yeah, I think that they absolutely deserve to be ranked highly. Again, at least for last season, these were both above average coaching units. The play calling was above average. They were pluses for the team. The coaching, I would argue, is the reason that they won the Big Ten and had a chance to make the college football playoff again. And, for me, I think that I don't want to call them questions because it's not questions. I think that it's easier for me to credit Sharon Moore for what he's done over the past couple of years than it is Jesse Minter, because Jesse Minter obviously was a first-year assistant last year. But, the results are the results, and the results were there. So I had them number 5 on my list, but I would say that I have three people fighting for 2 spots here. So they're in that 5, 6 somewhere amorphous range.
Okay, so who's your number 2 combo then?
So I'm going to go a little off board, and I'm going to go with Andy Ludwig and Morgan Scalley at Utah.
Not that far off the board. They're 3rd for me.
Okay. They, I think, have done a tremendous job. Morgan Scalley is known, I think, a little bit more than Andy Ludwig, but Ludwig did a really great job over the past 2 years of taking this offense to a really versatile place. I don't want to diminish players and crediting coaches. I think that Cameron Rising is fine. I think he's an okay quarterback. And I think that the way that this offense has been called has been critical to how efficient it has been throughout Pac-12 play. I don't think that they have game-breaking talent, but they've managed to move the ball on basically everybody. They've developed tight ends at an incredible level and put them in position to succeed. Once Brent Keithy went out, they were like, all right, Dalton Kincaid and Thomas Yasmin, this Canadian who's hardly ever played football, comes in. Like, they just do such a good job of putting players in good positions. And defensively, they're a known commodity. They recruit exceptionally well. They're a factory of linebackers. They're just so good on both sides of the ball. And I don't think it's any coincidence that they continually play above their heads because these two guys are there.
Morgan Scalley, we have to mention, had his salary cut in half a year ago because it was found that he used a racial slur in a text message in 2013. He's now had that salary reinstated. And so there is something in his past that needs to be noted, but seems like he is likely at the time, he was officially the head coach in waiting at Utah at that time. And so they cut his salary and took away the head coach in waiting title. Now he's got his salary back. He is no longer the head coach in waiting, though, but he still might be the head coach in waiting. And he is a Ute through and through. That is a guy whose name, it feels like every time there's an opening at a big time program for defensive coordinator, his name gets thrown out. And then it's like, he's not leaving. Like, this is his place. He loves it here. This is where he was made to coach. Kyle Whittingham can't coach forever. And Morgan Scalley very likely is the next head coach at Utah. But the result is that you get a guy who probably could have a higher profile job. I like to say better job because Utah's awesome. I picked Utah to make the playoff this year. I mean, Utah's like one of the 10 best programs in college football right now. It's a great job. It's a great program. Great place to work. But Andy Ludwig also, again, like, go Google Andy Ludwig. He's on every Notre Dame list, right? Everybody is doing a list of, who might replace Tommy Rees. This is a guy, to your point, again, you respect people. It's why I respect Todd Monken. They don't just have great receivers, chuck it up and go. He found a way to make the most of the players he had. Andy Ludwig, what do you have? You have tight ends. You have a quarterback who's good at this. You run the ball this way. Boom, it works. So, yeah, not off the radar, right on the radar. So our top three, of our top five, we have three of the same top five. We know Georgia, Michigan, and Utah, all in the top five for both of us. I just realized I don't officially have a number five. I have a number four, and then also vibes. So when we come back, vibes. We'll figure out the bottom of our list after this.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
All right, Doug and Shehah are back. Exciting news for everybody. We are getting rid of our subscription episode, which means not that it's going away. It means that we're going to have 2 free episodes a week starting next week. So we always have had this free show, and then we've had a bonus episode for Apple Podcast subscribers who paid $2.99 a month and got that extra show every week. Now you all get it. Congratulations, everybody. More of us.
More
free
content.
So you don't have to do anything. Wherever you find this, if you're listening right now, it's the same place. It'll just be twice instead of one time. So that'll start next week. We will welcome everybody. We'll welcome all the loyal listeners who are like, $3 a month seems a little steep for these guys. Welcome. Welcome to free.
Also, shout out to y'all who kept DMing me that I'd love to be able to pay for your extra content, but I don't have an iPhone. That's a non-factor now. Okay, it wasn't my fault. I couldn't do anything about it.
It actually was Shehan's fault, but I'll take this.
Man.
No, it wasn't Shehan's fault. It's a thing we tried, and we had a lot of discussions about shouldn't there be another way besides just the Apple thing, but we never got there. So now it's free. So now it's not an issue anymore. So starting next week, twice a week. I don't know if the days might adjust. This show typically comes out on Wednesday. Maybe we'll go to like a Tuesday, Thursday. We're not exactly sure. We'll figure that out, but it's going to be two a week. Just subscribe, then you won't miss anything. Okay. My number 4 is Kentucky.
Okay.
So Kentucky has hired back Liam Cohen, who they had, and then who left to be and was great, was so good. He went to be the offensive coordinator of Los Angeles Rams. I don't know if people know, but the Rams had a bad year this year. So now he's back. They lured him back to Kentucky as the offensive coordinator. They're paying him I think he's making 1.7. They are paying for this dude. And then their defensive coordinator is Brad White, who's done a really good job there. Their defense has been really pretty highly ranked at times. When Brian Kelly got hired at LSU, he flew to
Louisiana interviewed at LSU. I think there are people that have come after him, and so far he has decided to stay at Kentucky. So I think these are both guys on the way up. That Liam Cohen, right? You have an NFL dalliance. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's like Kentucky, he says, is like the place he wants to be. We'll see how long that lasts. If he's really good, he'll get a head coach offer. And Brad White, I think, you read people who cover Kentucky, they think Brad White's ready for that. Brad White would be qualified for a jump with how well the Kentucky defense has played in recent years. So Mark Stoops has done a great job at Kentucky. Kentucky's a consistent winner in football, that is not a birthright for Kentucky football to be good in the SEC. So you cannot underestimate what Mark Stoops has done, but having two guys like this and to get Cohen back, there's some sizzle to it, because you're paying him big money and he's coming from the Rams, and that's cool. But there's substance to it because he got the NFL opportunity because of how good the Kentucky offense had been under him. So maybe it's a little high for this, but I feel like these are two coordinators that make a difference. And so I have Kentucky fourth.
I honestly didn't particularly consider this because this was also one where it's interesting to try to manage exactly defensively what's Mark Stoops, what's Brad White, and that's something that we talked about before the show is, there are situations like, the obvious one is Ryan Day, right? Where he calls plays, and how do you balance this versus something else? Now, I do think that Brad White calls plays, but certainly Mark Stoops is involved in that process. This is probably a pairing I should have considered a little more. I think Liam Cohen is really good. When you look at all this stuff about Will Levis being a draft prospect, a lot of that has to do with what they were able to do with him under Liam Cohen. And defensively, for people who don't know, Brad White comes from sort of the Matt House school of defense, and Matt House has done a tremendous job at LSU. They kind of got the master instead of the student whenever they did make that defensive coordinator hire. And I think it's a great combination. We kind of have to wait and see it play out this year. I think that's probably the one thing holding it back on my list a little bit, but I say that, and my number 4 is two coaches who have very much never played together, or never coached together rather. But first I have to get to my number 3.
Okay, so we have your number 1, your number 2, and your number 5 so far. So who was your number 3?
My number 3, and again, this one is like, if you ask me in 5 minutes, I might have a different idea. But my number 3 is Penn State, Mike Yurcich and Manny Diaz. And also with it, Anthony Poindexter on the defensive side of the ball as well. I think that this program has done as good a job as anyone on the defensive side of the ball for several years. And Poindexter has been there through this whole process. Manny Diaz comes in as a very well-respected defensive coordinator to replace Brent Pry, who leaves to become the head coach at Virginia Tech. And I think Mike Yurcich did a really solid job this year of getting the most out of Sean Clifford. There were some growing pains in his first season in 2021. I think in 2022, he did a great job. We're going to kind of have to wait and see whether this grouping can move up potentially, although they are at 3 on my list. So maybe they're higher than they maybe should be right now. But I think that a lot of questions are going to come out about him with Drew Aller, the superstar rising, I guess, redshirt freshman, I guess he'll be next year, or sophomore. I don't know if it really matters, but the new starting quarterback, Drew Aller. But Mike Yurcich has a track record of success at Oklahoma State. He was not the main problem at Texas whenever that staff was let go. And I think Penn State has been a really good fit for him. So I felt like these were two coordinators who are both pluses. So I have them at number 3.
That's an interesting ranking. To me, a little bit, the jury is still out on Mike Yurcich. Joe Moorhead was so impactful as the offensive coordinator at Penn State. And there's a world like it just didn't work out for Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State as the head coach. It wasn't a cultural fit. He went to Oregon and he helped beat Ohio State as the offensive coordinator at Oregon. And now he's a head coach in the MAC, right? And I think if you ask Joe Moorhead if you want to go back in time and just stay at Penn State and be like the Todd Monken of Penn State and make $2 million a year, he might go back and say, let's stay there. And so I feel like they are still missing him, but this is a big year for this. So I like the idea, like Manny Diaz, again, who probably got the short end of the stick at Miami, that they just wanted Mario Cristobal and they kind of had to scoot Manny Diaz out the side door to make that happen. So Manny Diaz, who I think, will be a head coach again, comes back as a defensive coordinator who, again, is the guy we're talking about. He was so good as a defensive coordinator, he became a head coach. And now he's back to being a defensive coordinator. I think that's a good hire. I think that's real. The Yurcich thing, they were not on my list of 11 because I still feel like I have a question mark about Mike Yurcich. But I do agree with you, for a team that was a top 10 team whose only 2 losses were to playoff teams, and a quarterback in Sean Clifford who is limited. He can do what he can do, but he cannot do much more. But they found, and like the year before, their offense was bad. They had no offensive line and no running game. So they found a left tackle this year. They found a running game this year with some young guys. They had Parker Washington. They had Michael Tinsley. They had some real receivers. And then they found a way for Sean Clifford to make that work and manage the game and emphasize what he does well. And how do you do that? Well, because the guy calling the play figures out how to do it. So I actually think that's a really good one. That is worth talking about. So I like Mike Yurcich and Manny Diaz being here. And if this pops, if the Drew Aller thing is a thing, like Mike Yurcich is going to get some head coach looks, because the next 2 years of Penn State football might be as important as any 2 years of Penn State football since Kajana Carter and Kerry Collins were there. Like, this is what they have been waiting for. And Mike Yurcich is the guy who has to make it great. There's potential there. They've got the line. They've got the running backs. They always run receivers through there, and they've got the quarterback they've never had. And Mike Yurcich has to maximize that. So I like thinking about Penn State on a list like this, Shehan.
And by the way, if this doesn't work out, I'll just add this to the list of I have no idea what the hell is going on at Penn State ever, and I don't know if they're good or bad or anything. They're the most like not even confusing. Confusing implies that I have ideas about them that are like not cogent. I just don't know what's happening over there. Just I look up and it's like, oh, I guess they went 11-2. Oh, I guess they got destroyed by everybody and went 7-6. I have no idea what's happening over there. Like, there's no the human brain is built to take in narrative, and Penn State is the most narrativeless program under James Franklin that I've ever seen. There's just no through line with anything that's going on, but I think that might be changing right now, because I think they finally do have the class that's going to do something consistent and build something lasting. So we'll see. 2023 is a big year for them.
Okay, that's a good pick. Number 5 for me, I am going to go with Wisconsin. And I am going to go with Phil Longo as the hire that Luke Fickell made. Got him from North Carolina because of their personal relationship, to run the kind of offense that Luke Fickell wants to change what Wisconsin does offensively, wants to open it up, wants to throw the ball more. They got multiple transfer quarterbacks in there, and the chance for Phil Longo to merge the best of what Wisconsin has been and the new version of Wisconsin. This is a guy that Luke Fickell went out and got. I think that's a big hire on the offensive side of the ball. Then defensively, Mike Tressel, who is the nephew of Jim Tressel, has been with Luke Fickell a long time. Mike Tressel, we started off talking about nepotism in this sport. He started off with Mark D'Antonio, who was Jim Tressel's right-hand man, and then Mike Tressel worked for Mark D'Antonio forever at Michigan State. To Jim Tressel's credit, he never hired his nephew. So Mike Tressel never worked as a full-time assistant for Jim Tressel, but then he wound up at Cincinnati with Luke Fickell. And Marcus Freeman was Luke Fickell's right-hand man, and then when he went to Notre Dame, like, Mike Tressel's the guy now. So Mike Tressel is going to be the defensive coordinator. Luke Fickell's a defensive head coach. I think it's a pretty good pairing, and this is mostly about Phil Longo. But listen, Mike Tressel's proven that he's been around the Big Ten. He knows what's up. We can get into the people, like the other people that didn't make our top 5, and there's one in particular I want to talk about. I don't have a strong conviction about this, but they're certainly in my top 11, and I'll go here because I like the potential of what Phil Longo might be. And again, sometimes when it's a new coach, like, I have some other first-year coaches on here, because when you're the new coach and you got some juice and your AD says fire away, you can hire a good staff. Like, you can go get your guys. But I think for Luke Fickell to go do this is a big deal. So I think Phil Longo has a chance to make a big impact.
No, I'm very excited about this pairing. Like you said, I think Mike Tressel has proven to this point that he is going to be a serviceable, above average, solid defensive coordinator in the Big Ten. But the Phil Longo thing is so interesting, because he is such a dynamic offensive coach, but the way that he does it is not just the most un-Wisconsin thing I've ever seen in my life, but like the most un-Luke Fickell thing that I've ever seen, right? Because I mean, the guys that we're talking about coming through before, like we had Mike Denbrock last year, right? Who helped lead them to the college football playoff before he was hired away by Brian Kelly. Like, that is a modest, like, slow things down, like be very deliberate type offensive coordinator. And then you bring in Phil Longo, who is speed, pace, tempo. Just the complete antithesis to what you think about when you think of Wisconsin. And now the thing is, and I think this is important to know, is that Luke Fickell is not an idiot. He knows the reputation. He understands what he's signing up for. And I anticipate that if they decided to make this decision, they've had conversations about how can we moderate what you do to really fit our team best. Because Luke Fickell is a CEO. He is somebody who is thinking about how everything will work together. So I anticipate that that's going to be less of a problem than people think, but it is a departure, to say the least.
Yeah. And I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see this combination. 5 for you. Oh, no, we have your 5. Who's your 4? Last one for you.
So I'm going with another pair of coordinators who have never coordinated together as part of a new coaching staff. And I'm going out to Boulder, Colorado. And I'm going with Sean Lewis, from the former head coach at Kent State, and Charles Kelly, a former associate defense coordinator, a co-coordinator at Alabama. These are two really experienced coaches. In my opinion, Sean Lewis should already be a Power 5 head coach. It's kind of crazy that Sean Lewis is not, with everything that he accomplished at Kent State, a place that's really, really difficult to win. But instead, he ends up joining Coach Prime's staff over at Colorado. And Charles Kelly is just a guy who's been around for a long time. He hasn't necessarily run his own defenses all the time at this highest level, but he is somebody, when you talk about first-year staffs and joining a program like Colorado, a very impressive hire, I think. He was defensive coordinator at Florida State from 2014 to 2017. It was a mixed bag, but this is going to be a different kind of game, playing alongside Sean Lewis's offense, playing on Deion Sanders' staff in the Pac-12. I really like this combination. I think that this is about as experienced and credible a combination of coordinators as you could have possibly expected from Deion Sanders at Colorado. And I love the move, and I think that it's going to work.
I love it. I love the inclusion of that here. That's a really smart choice by you. Weren't in my top 11, but they should be, because again, what Sean Lewis, man, gave Georgia a little bit of trouble last year and got a lot of people's attention, but did a good job at Kent State. So I like that top 5. Ohio State's not on this list. You mentioned this. I think this is a huge thing to watch. Ryan Day has said that he is going to have Brian Hartline call plays in the spring, with the idea of Ryan Day possibly giving up play calling. So that's why I don't have Ohio State in my top 5. Kevin Wilson left to be the head coach at Tulsa. He was the non-play calling offensive coordinator there. Jim Knowles, we know, was the big hire of the offseason a year ago. But Ohio State's defense was much improved, but also Ohio State's defense had moments that let them down in the 2 biggest games of the year against Michigan and Georgia. So I did not feel compelled, Jim Knowles has to be on this list at all costs. And Brian Hartline's never called plays, and he might be about to. And I actually think it's the right move, potentially, for Ryan Day to give up play calling to become more of a culture coach at Ohio State. I think they could use that. I think he can better use his time. And I think Brian Hartline is certainly capable, but we've never seen it. And so monitoring, we'll keep our eyes on it. And the difference of whether Brian Hartline calls plays or not is a huge deal. Brian Hartline will eventually call plays. I thought maybe it was going to be that Ryan Day was going to say, okay, Hartline's the offensive coordinator. That's a promotion for him. We knew that was coming when Kevin Wilson left. But I'm going to call plays, and Brian Hartline's going to be groomed to do so at some point. And instead, Ryan Day this month said, no, we're going to see how it goes in the spring. And the reason I'm going to try is because I think that's what he wants to do. I think he wants to pass it off, but I don't think we should put them there yet. But that's a big decision for any head coach, Shehan, when you step away from the play calling duties on the expert side of the ball.
No doubt. And I think that this has a chance to really work. But for me, I can't put somebody who's never been an offensive coordinator, right, in a list like this. No matter, I think that Jim Knowles is a top 5 defensive coordinator potentially in the game. I think he's really, really good. But you can't put a 0, right? You can't put a 0, which is what we have right now from Brian Hartline, even though I think that he's certainly set up to be a huge success. So if Kevin Wilson was still here, I think that that's an interesting discussion. Then maybe I'm putting them at 2 or 3, right? They're really up there, but I don't think I can do that with Brian Hartline. A couple other people who I had on my short list. Clemson with Garrett Riley and Wes Goodwin. I think that Wes Goodwin did a pretty solid job in his first season as defensive coordinator. It's hard to always tell with a first-year guy because you're just like, are they just continuing what was already there or are they building it? But I think he did a more than admirable job, and Garrett Riley is going to be so huge for that team. He was the Broyles Award winner as the best assistant coach in the country this year, and let's put it this way, I don't think that he's going to go full Gaddis.
It's terrible having a thing named for you.
I feel so bad for him. It's just, what is going on, man?
And again, on the list, there's like a lot of interesting guys still out there who don't have jobs yet. We'll be curious to see where they land. I also had them on my list. I have one that do you have Kansas State on your list?
I considered them. I considered them very strongly.
Colin Klein.
Yep.
Used to be the quarterback there, offensive coordinator, Joe Klanderman, who had been a success at the lower level, right, as a defensive guy. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on the coordinators at Kansas State, but it feels like they've really mattered to the success Kansas State has had. So I'm always on alert for Big 12 stuff from you, Shehhan. So I was curious. You at least gave them some consideration.
Oh, absolutely. And, you mentioned you're not in the weeds with Big 12 coordinators. Well, I am in the weeds with Big 12 coordinators. The only thing that kept me limited to some extent with them is their relative lack of experience. Klanderman took over play calling responsibilities in 2020 on the defensive side of the ball, has done a really, really solid job. The unit's definitely improved. Colin Klein has 1 year of work, and it was a really good year of work, but it's just when you compare him to some of these other guys on the list, I felt like there were other people with a little bit more of a track record and more experience at this level. But they're definitely a combo I'd watch heading forward. Kansas State, look, they lost a lot. They're not going to be back in the Big 12 title game next year, but they have a great staff. Another thing to mention with Colin Klein is that Chris Kleiman, the head coach over at Kansas State, let go of his longtime offensive coordinator in order to promote Colin Klein, who, remember, did not come with him. He was somebody who was already at Kansas State as a grad assistant and as an analyst. So this is somebody who was kind of certainly not pushed onto him, but it was somebody who he inherited in some ways at Kansas State and really liked what he saw. So I thought that was a really smart move on his part to promote him, and it's worked out in a big way. Another guy that I will go with is I'll actually say in the Big 12. I have two more. The one Big 12 one, I was very impressed with Texas Tech staff this year. They have Zach Kittley, who was the offensive coordinator at Western Kentucky during Bailey Zappe's breakout season, also came with him from Houston Baptist, which is now Houston Christian, which is a whole other thing. But then on the defensive side of the ball, Tim DeRuyter, a longtime successful defensive coordinator, had success across the state of Texas, was, I believe, the former head coach at Fresno State, I think it was. And he transformed that unit in 1 year. It was a pretty okay unit in 2021, and in 2022 the numbers don't look great, but if you watch them play, they held on to games a lot. They were a big part of Texas Tech finding a way to win 8 games for the first time since 2013. So that's a combo that I definitely think people should be watching.
One other combo that I thought about, Ole Miss, which just hired Pete Golding from Alabama, which Pete Golding, it's one of those lateral moves the program's not as good, so it's not lateral, but it sort of ran its course at Bama, but that's a pretty good hire for Ole Miss, I think. And then Charlie West Jr. is 29, but he's on this list again. Find a list. He was on the list when the Patriots were hiring an offensive coordinator before Bill O'Brien took it. He's on the Notre Dame list now. I guess it's just because his dad worked at both those places.
Hold up. Are you sure that you're not reading lists from like 2005? Are you sure there's a junior there?
What was the phrase that Charlie Weiss had? Like a significant schematic advantage or whatever. So, yeah. So he's like, Charlie Weiss is one of those guys. I guess he was good, but like, this is not. I think Charlie Weiss Jr. might be overcoming some stuff with the wreckage that Papa left in his wake at a couple places.
He's never going to be hired in the state of Kansas. I can tell you that much.
No. So like, again, Charlie Weiss proved his football bona fides, but Charlie Weiss Jr., he's on people's minds. And so another young guy, he's not even 30, but I'll be really curious. Again, Lane Kiffin has a lot to say about how Ole Miss plays offensive football. But again, for a place like Ole Miss, you get, not that Pete Golding's on the way down, but this guy was the 4-year defensive coordinator at Alabama. Now you got him And maybe Charlie Weiss Jr. is going to be something, and you have him on the way up right now. I think it's a potentially interesting, I didn't give him serious consideration for the top 5, but interesting combination potentially for Ole Miss.
It's definitely an interesting combo. I didn't love Ole Miss's 2022 offense. That would be my one qualm. And they switched from Jeff Lebby to Charlie Weiss Jr. during that run. It's more personnel. It's not that I don't think he's good, but I think I needed to see a little bit more from him. I am very optimistic about the Pete Golding hire. Like when you're the defensive coordinator at Alabama, you can't win. You're either Kirby Smart and you're not. Those are the bars, right? And so for me, I was not that concerned. They were an inconsistent unit at times. I also feel like, and somebody who is much smarter schematically than me should probably go deeper into this. They played a style that I think was really built to stop the sort of flyover type game, the really spread type stuff. And if you're Alabama, you don't really need that the same way because you just have 4 defensive linemen who win their one-on-one matchups and you're done. And so I think that getting back to the basics will be good for Alabama. But I think that actually, I think that Pete Golding will actually raise the floor a whole lot at Ole Miss versus what they've had there the past couple of years. So I like the hire quite a bit.
All right. Those are our best combos.
One more.
Oh, you got,
I got one more.
Another honorable mention for Shehah.
I know. It's a long list.
Oh, by the way, real quick, we're both fired. We're over 105. So this is the last hurrah. We'll be back next week with 2 free episodes with 2 different hosts because we've both been fired by the algorithm that Gary Barta made in charge of this podcast.
You mean your dad, Mr. Lesmerises, is firing us? We'll never forget the email that I got from Lesmerises and Son saying, "Would you want to be on my podcast?" Let
me check just 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Hey, Dad. Yeah, can I still do the podcast even though we went over? He said, "Okay." I have to wash his car, but we can still do it. He said,
but at least we got the raise. My last one. And really, I think that staffs are just so fascinating. I could talk about this all day, honestly. But my last one, this is the one that I considered in my 5-6, where I thought about putting them over Michigan, is Oregon State. Oregon State has been really, really solid. Brian Lindgren didn't have the best year last year because, as I've mentioned many, many, many times, Oregon State threw for 60 yards and beat Oregon. They threw for 60 yards. How is that possible? But in previous years, he's managed this offense really, really, really well. They had a great running game despite the issues passing the ball. Now they're going to bring in DJU, and I think they're going to just be legitimate Pac-12 contenders. And Trent Bray is somebody who I'm surprised does not get more attention as one of those guys on the defensive side of the ball. Maybe they feel like he, is specific to the way that the Pac-12 plays. Maybe, I don't know what it is exactly, but he's done an unbelievable job. Because remember, Jonathan Smith is an offensive coach. That's not somebody who's managing that defense. It's really, I think, a credit to Trent Bray, the way that this defense has played and the fact that they've had a chance to obviously compete for 10 wins for the first time in God knows how long at Oregon State. So really impressive group of coordinators to me. And I think that they have a bright future, especially heading into 2023, when I think that with how much they bring back, they are going to be a legitimate factor, not just in the Pac-12, but who knows? Maybe we'll have to have a discussion about them whenever August comes around.
We are both very excited about Oregon State. I am already having Iowa State flashbacks. I don't know that you've gone out. This is like maybe a fresh limb for you to climb out on. I feel like I climb out on these limbs too often and I fall off. So I'm going to be careful. I might just pick Georgia 4 times to take every playoff spot. I'm not sure. It depends if Todd Monken is back. But we will keep our eye on Oregon State because I think both of us like a lot of what's going on there. Okay, that officially will do it. Next week, 2 free shows, and then all the weeks after that. For now, for Shehan Jeyarajah, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.